African Americans in this country are the only groups. They have no culture. It depends on who you meet, where you meet them.
But currently there's not an African American culture?
No.
Yes, there is.
What is it? Name 2 value systems in the African American culture.
Value system?
Peace and blessings. This is your brother Asar Hotep. And I have been trying to hold off from joining this particular conversation on whether African Americans have culture or not. And this seems to be one of the foundational arguments for the so-called diaspora wars. And sometimes I forget that, I'm in a privileged space because I took Africana studies and African American studies, and you just assume that others have taken these courses and understand the nature of our history and where to find source material to back up certain arguments in a thing. And that just is not the case. And even Continental Africans who seem to be intelligent are very ignorant of history, of culture, and all that and what it means. So we want to address this today. So I want to raise the name of one of our premier psychologists and one of the founders of the discipline of Black psychology, and that is Dr. Wade Nobles. And he is an elder and an experimental social psychologist who received his PhD from Stanford University. He is also the founder and executive director of the Institute for the Advancement or the Advanced Study of Black Family Life and Culture, and is a full tenure professor in the Department of Black Studies, the School of Ethnic Studies at the San Francisco State University. And anyone who knows about Black scholars and Africana studies would be familiar with him and his colleagues. And so while there's more people we can concentrate on, I just want to kind of keep it narrow for the sake of simplicity, but more so because he has organized the labeling and the framework for understanding African American culture. And so often in these conversations, people throw around the word culture, but they never define it. So we're going to stick with Dr. Nobles for a moment and use his definition of culture, because you'll find it defined differently depending on who you talk to, but they all have this common thread that runs through all the definitions. But again, for the sake of simplicity and consistency, we're going to stick with Dr. Nobles for a minute. And so Dr. Nobles defines culture as a process that represents the vast structure of behaviors, ideals, attitudes, values, habits, beliefs, customs, language, rituals, ceremonies, and practices peculiar to a particular group of people, and that provides them with a general design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. And so understanding that definition of culture, Dr. Nobles created, along with a slew of other cultural theorists, sociologists, psychologists who are engaged in the study of African and African American studies, he has synthesized what it means to have an African, what it means when we say African American culture, and he organized it into 8 precepts and then 9 cultural themes. And so we're going to get into that in just a moment. And so one of the sources in which you can find this particular list that I'm going to name is the Utilizing Culture in the Achievement of Educational Excellence for African American Adults, from Cultural Precepts to Reoccurring Themes. So In this video, I'm going to list the 8 precepts and list the 9 reoccurring themes of African American culture. And then in subsequent videos, I'm going to go into the details with examples about each one of those things. So I'm going to double them up on each of these videos. So I'm going to go with defining one precept, and then I'm going to match it with one reoccurring theme. And then the last one, since there's 9, I'm going to double up on the reoccurring themes so that we can, get through it. So it won't be a super long list of videos. So in this video, I'm only going to list them, and then we'll follow up with the details on what all of that means. And so from this point on, no one can argue that African Americans do not have a culture. They just don't. They don't know how to articulate what it is, right? And so in this particular essay, he reinforces the notion that although African Americans differ in many levels, there is a cultural substratum that unites African Americans on a fundamental level. And it is these practices and perspectives that, when composited together, create the African American worldview. And so African American culture, as Dr. Noble states, is in fact the composite of African cultural retentions and American social inventions. African Americans, of course, are very complex. And so there's a ton of literature on the retentions of general African cultures that were maintained here throughout the history of enslavement to the present. And so we won't go into them in this video, but that requires a separate conversation because especially with these FBA and ADOS folks that claim that we don't have any African retentions, or we've been here, we're not Africans, we're not associated with Africans. And this underscores the importance of having an Africana Studies program. And so when we're talking about the cultural precepts, it is defined as the intrinsic principle, rule, or law which serves to impose a standard of action or conduct consistent with the culture. And so the 8 precepts are defined as, or labeled as, consubstantiality, interdependence, egalitarianism, collectivism, transformation, cooperation, humanness, and synergism. These precepts ground this cultural orientation that informs or expresses themselves as the next reoccurring themes, which in turn shape and influence behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs. And so we just gave you the 8 precepts, and now here are the 9 reoccurring themes, and these together make African American culture. So spirituality, resilience, humanism, communalism, orality and verbal expressiveness, personal style and uniqueness, realness, emotional vitality, and musicality and rhythm. And so, again, these 8 precepts: consubstantiality, interdependence, egalitarianism, collectivism, transformation, cooperation, humanness, synergism, and these 9 reoccurring themes: spirituality, resilience, humanism, communalism, orality and verbal expressiveness, personal style and uniqueness, realness, emotional vitality, musicality, and rhythm, is the matrix that defines African American culture. So in the subsequent videos, we are going to get into the details of what each one of these precepts and reoccurring themes mean. So make sure that you share this video, make sure you write down the details of what was said, and then I will see you in the next video. Hotep, peace.